They say you can't grow sunflowers in clay soil. Well, I've seen one sprout between two cracked bricks out behind the shed, right next to where Daddy left his busted wheelbarrow. It stretched toward the sky like it didn't know it wasn't supposed to. Some things just grow where they don't belong, I guess. I was one of them. I grew up in a family of calloused hands and early mornings. Our town was nothing but dust, diesel fumes, and stubborn fields that swallowed sweat like rain. My daddy, James Jim Carter, was a third-generation construction foreman who believed in steel-toed boots, church on Sundays, and a hard slap of reality anytime someone got too dreamy for their own good. We lived in a weathered two-story on the outskirts of town, where the road turned from asphalt to gravel. My bedroom window faced the east, and every morning I'd wake to the silhouette of Daddy's truck rolling down the drive, headed to some job site that needed framing, concrete, or whatever else kept a roof over our heads. My older brothers followed in his muddy footprints without question. Brandon, then Nate, then little Eli once he was old enough to hold a hammer without dropping it on his toe. Me? I wanted to paint murals on grain silos. Or read stories to kids with speech delays. Or teach them to make clay birds with their hands and tell me what they'd name them. I was the youngest and the only girl. Mama died when I was 10, and from then on it was just me and the boys. Daddy didn't know what to do with a girl who cried over broken crayons or stayed up drawing imaginary towns in her math notebook. He'd grunt and say, "The world don't pay dreamers, Jenny. You better find yourself a job that don't come with glitter." He never meant to be cruel. Not really. But it stuck. I tried to bury that part of me for a while. Helped with chores, cleaned the toolshed, even tried working summers with the boys laying insulation till the fibers made me itch like fury. But even while I shoveled gravel or stacked lumber, my mind drifted. I'd see color where there was only gray. I'd imagine what kind of stories the cement mixers would tell if they could talk. I was 17 the day Daddy found my sketchpad tucked in my toolbox. I'd drawn portraits of the crew, and in the margins were ideas for a community space, somewhere kids could come after school, learn to build things, grow gardens, make art. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could build something real from those dreams. He flipped through the pages like they were something sticky he'd stepped in. "You think this is gonna feed you?" he snapped, holding up a charcoal drawing of a tree growing out of a cracked sidewalk. "It's not about that," I said, voice trembling. "I want to." He slammed it shut. "You'll end up broke and barefoot, Jenny Lynn. Just like your aunt when she ran off to find herself in Portland. Came back 6 years later with nothing but a lip ring and debt." I didn't say anything after that. Just took my sketchpad back and left it on a shelf in my closet. But something in me cracked that day, something small and fiery and too stubborn to stay buried. I started saving, took every babysitting job, painted signs for local events, sold homemade cards at the flea market. I stayed up nights reading about nonprofits and social work and grant writing, even though I barely understood half of it. By 22, I had enough to rent a crumbling storefront on Main Street. Daddy never came to see it. Not when I painted the walls myself. Not when I opened the doors for the Clay Hearth, a community art studio and support space for kids from working families like mine. Not even when we got a blurb in the paper or hosted our first town-wide mural walk. He didn't believe in things you couldn't measure with a level. But I kept going, because I believed. The hardest part wasn't the work. I was used to work. It was the silence. The first week I opened the Clay Hearth, I sat behind the chipped front desk, watching dust dance in the sunbeams. No one came. Not one kid. Not a single parent. I had flyers stapled on every corkboard in town, even slipped one into the church bulletin, but still nothing. Turns out folks don't trust what they don't understand. Especially in towns like ours, where dreams are seen as indulgences and art as something rich people hang over fireplaces. I nearly cried into a bucket of paint water by the end of that week. I had 10 folding chairs, 3 donated easels, 2 cracked sinks, and enough colored pencils to start my own preschool, but no one to share it with. That weekend, I dragged a heavy wooden table onto the sidewalk and started painting a mural right there, in front of the building. I figured if the mountain wouldn't come to me, I'd better make some noise and let people know I was here. I painted a big open pair of hands holding a garden of strange, colorful flowers, each one sprouting objects from a child's imagination: a boat, a dinosaur, a planet, a paper heart. By mid-afternoon, old Mrs. Huffman from the bakery next door shuffled over with a cinnamon roll and said, "Well, it's not the ugliest thing I've seen today." Which, coming from her, was basically a standing ovation. Then a little voice behind me asked, "Can I try?" I turned, brush still in my hand, and saw a girl, maybe 8 or 9, arms crossed, chin jutted out like she was ready to argue. Her name was Maddie. She ended up painting a purple octopus with a crown right in the middle of my mural, and I didn't stop her. In fact, I handed her a bigger brush. That was the crack. The first break in the wall between me and the town. Once Maddie started coming every afternoon, her cousin followed. Then 2 boys from the trailer park down by the mill. Then someone's grandma who used to be a seamstress and started teaching embroidery classes on Thursdays. It was slow, but it was something. Still, I was bleeding money. The rent wasn't steep, but the leaky pipes in the back room were, and the heating bill was a joke in February. I scraped by on side jobs and donations, a jar of quarters from a woman I'd never met, 3 canvases left on the doorstep, even a stack of barely used brushes from an old art teacher who'd retired 2 towns over. Bless her. And all the while, Daddy didn't say a word. When I saw him at Brandon's barbecue that spring, he barely looked at me. Just grunted when I said hi, then went back to talking about concrete sealant with Uncle Ray. I caught him glancing at my paint-stained fingers once, like I had something shameful on me. "You always were too soft," he muttered when we ended up alone by the grill. "Maybe soft's what this town needs," I said. He shook his head like I was speaking Greek. A few months later, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. I remember because the after-school group had just finished painting kindness rocks to leave around town, little bright stones with messages like "You matter" and "Smile anyway." Maddie had just spilled glitter glue on my only good rug when a woman walked in holding a leather satchel and speaking with a thick French accent. Her name was Camille. She worked with a European foundation that supported rural youth projects around the world. Said she'd seen photos of our mural online. Turns out some traveler posted a picture on a blog about forgotten American towns making beauty out of hardship. I didn't even know we'd gone viral. Camille walked through the studio slowly, running her hand along the old wooden window frame like it was part of a museum. The kids stared at her like she was royalty. She smiled and said, "What you're doing here, it is humble magic." A few weeks later, I got a letter. I'd been selected for a cultural preservation grant, $50,000, to expand community access to the arts, with mentorship from established creatives and educators across the globe. I sat in my car reading that letter over and over again. My fingers were shaking. I think I cried so hard I forgot how to breathe for a minute. Then I drove to the cemetery and told Mama about it out loud, right there under the willow tree. I whispered, "We did it, Mama." But there was still one person I hadn't told. That night, I stood on Daddy's porch in the dark, letter in hand, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. He opened the door and looked at me like I was a stranger. "I got a grant," I said, voice thin. "For the studio, 50 grand. He blinked. "Then, you mean someone gave you money for paint and rocks?" I smiled. "No, Daddy. They gave me money for building something that lasts." I never wanted to leave home, not really. But when the invitation came, I said yes so fast my head spun. Camille called me one crisp September morning with a voice full of delight. "Jenny," she said, "we would love for you to come to Brussels to speak about your project at the Rural Arts and Social Impact Summit. We'll cover your flight and stay. You'll be among visionaries." Me. A visionary. From a town with one blinking stoplight and a bait shop doubling as a post office. The trip was in November. Just a few weeks to prepare. I had to get my passport expedited, dig out the one pair of shoes that didn't have paint smudges, and figure out how to talk about impact without crying into the microphone. When I told the kids, they made a giant goodbye banner out of an old bedsheet and left glitter handprints all over it. Maddie wrote, "Don't forget us little people," in hot pink across the top. I packed it in my suitcase. Daddy didn't say much when he heard. Just nodded like it was weather news. "You sure they're not gonna laugh at you?" he asked over the phone. "Maybe. But I'm going anyway. Don't come crying when it falls apart." I almost hung up. But instead, I said I won't. And if it does fall apart, I'll build it back. I learned from the best. The line went quiet. Then a click. He'd hung up first. Brussels was another world. Glistening trams, clean air, people who made space for wonder in their lives. The summit was held in a renovated textile factory turned into a glass-ceilinged cultural center. I stood on stage with a little slideshow of the clay hearths murals, photos of kids holding clay animals and wearing mismatched aprons. I talked about the grit behind hope, about how you build beauty where people expect none, about how kids in our town are taught to carry weight early, whether it's a toolbox or grief or the empty look in a parent's eyes when the factory shuts down. When I finished, the room stood in silence for a second, then gave me a standing ovation. An actual standing ovation. A woman from Finland hugged me afterward. Someone offered to fund a mobile art bus. I thought I'd never come down from that high. But then, a message from home. Mrs. Huffman passed away. The bakery was shuttered. And Maddie's mom lost her job at the school. Said they might move to the next county. Said Maddie cried and refused to leave the studio. Something in me twisted. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was that feeling when your roots tug at you, remind you where you grew. I got back right before Thanksgiving. Town hadn't changed much. Same leaning fences, same rusty mailbox at the corner of Pine and Hill. But when I walked into the clay hearth, it was packed. The kids had thrown a welcome home, Miss Jenny, party with streamers made from cereal boxes and a sign that said, "She made the world see us." I had to step into the back and take a breath. That night, I sat on the studio floor with Maddie and a few of the other kids. We were sculpting tiny houses out of air-dry clay, and Maddie said, "Why can't the whole town be like this?" Like the studio, she meant. Warm. Open. Safe. That question lived in my chest for days. I walked through town in the early mornings, coffee in hand, making mental notes. The old school gym was falling apart. The town library's roof leaked. The lot where the steel factory used to stand was just dirt and ghosts now. And then, like a storm building in slow clouds, I saw it. We didn't need just a studio. We needed a movement. A way to revive the heart of our town, not just with paint, but with purpose. I started writing proposals at night. Applying for expansion grants, historic building use permits, anything I could get my hands on. I called Camille. I pitched a wild, impossible idea to turn our entire Main Street into a community-powered cultural corridor. Workshops, pop-up markets, open mics. A community garden behind the old hardware store. A tool library. An outdoor kiln. A mentorship program pairing retired tradespeople with teens to build benches, birdhouses, murals, anything. We called it the Renewal Project. Camille said, "It's mad. And it's beautiful." But I knew the hardest part was still ahead, because for any of this to work, I had to talk to Daddy. It was a Sunday when I walked up to his house with a proposal packet in my tote bag and a knot in my stomach. I'd included photos, budgets, even hand-drawn sketches of what the downtown could look like. He opened the door in his usual work flannel, looked me over, and said, "Well, hell. You look like you got something to sell." "I'm not selling," I said, stepping inside. "I'm asking for help." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind?" "The kind that involves lumber. And maybe showing a few teens how to not lose a thumb to a table saw." He chuckled, but barely. "I want to rebuild downtown," I said. "Not with shopping centers or chain stores. With soul. With people who care. People like you. You think that'll keep kids from leaving?" I shrugged. Maybe not all of them. but maybe it'll make them want to come back. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just stared at one of my sketches. Then, real quiet, he asked, "You draw this?" I nodded. "It's good." I blinked. "You think so?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "Yeah, Jenny. I do. There's a kind of magic in sweat. Not the glossy magazine kind, where everyone's glowing and picturesque. I mean the real stuff, sawdust in your hair, paint under your fingernails, the ache in your knees that tells you did something that matters." That's how the renewal project began. It started with 6 of us, me, Maddie's uncle who used to hang drywall, 2 retired teachers, a high schooler with a knack for welding, and my dad. Yep. Jim Carter, who once called my dreams whims with all the affection of a traffic ticket, showed up in his boots, toolbox in hand, and muttered, "Where we startin'?" I think I almost fainted. We started with the old gym. The roof had holes the size of car tires and squirrels living in the bleachers, but the bones were still good. Daddy walked the perimeter with a pencil behind his ear, tapping the walls and muttering calculations. He didn't say much, but I caught him watching me when I explained to the volunteers what this space would become: an indoor market in the winter, an art showcase in the summer, a place where the kids could perform plays or learn to build their own bikes. "You really think people are going to come to this?" he asked, arms crossed. "They already are," I said, nodding toward the doorway. A group of teenagers was filing in with gloves and garbage bags. One of them held a sign that said, "Our town, our hands." Daddy didn't say another word. He just picked up a crowbar and got to work. The first month was chaos in overalls. We discovered black mold behind a panel. The city gave us grief over a permit. One of the volunteers accidentally drove a nail through a water pipe, and we all got sprayed like a Three Stooges sketch. I nearly had a breakdown in the janitor's closet, quietly crying into a pack of damp insulation. But somehow it kept going. Camille helped us apply for another round of international funding, and we got it. Donations trickled in, $10 here, a box of supplies there. A bakery in Denmark sent us 200 aprons. Don't ask me why. Word spread. A news station from the city came out and did a segment. Suddenly we weren't just a dot on the map, we were the dot. People began driving in from nearby counties just to see what all the fuss was about. The mural kids were now teaching workshops to younger ones. We built planter boxes out of old pallets and filled them with marigolds. We transformed the alley behind the hardware store into a place people actually wanted to walk through, strung with fairy lights, painted with birds and skies, benches carved with poetry. Daddy helped build every single one of those benches. Sometimes I'd catch him showing a boy how to use a level, or watching a girl hammering in a nail with just the right force, and he'd get this look on his face. Not pride exactly, but something close. Like he was remembering something he hadn't let himself think about in a long time. One night, after a long day's work, we sat on the gym steps watching the sky turn lavender. Daddy pulled a thermos from his bag, coffee, still hot, and poured us both a cup. "You know," he said, "I always thought art was soft." I smiled. "Still think that?" He shook his head, real slow. "Nah, I see now. It ain't soft. It's stubborn. It don't give up, even when everything's broken." I nodded. "Like you." He smirked. "Like you, smartass." Then winter hit, and everything slowed. Construction halted. Supplies got delayed. The heating in the studio gave out during the worst blizzard we'd had in a decade. We bundled up, kept the doors open anyway, and let the kids come in for hot cocoa and board games, even if we couldn't run classes. One afternoon, Maddie pulled me aside. Her mom got a new job, in our town this time, and they'd decided to stay. "I don't want to go anywhere else," she said. "This place feels like my other home." I hugged her so hard I thought her puffy coat would burst. The renewal project wasn't just rebuilding walls. It was rebuilding people. Mr. Harris, who hadn't left his house in 5 years after his wife died, started coming on Tuesdays to paint birdhouses. The Peterson twins, once labeled troublemakers, now ran the mural club and got accepted to art school. Even my brother Nate started helping after work, said he didn't get it, but it felt better than sitting at the bar. Daddy came more often now, even when he didn't have to. He'd bring a thermos, offer to sand something down, or just sit in the back and watch the chaos unfold. He never apologized for the way he used to be. I never asked him to. But one day, as we were replacing a broken window in the gym, he handed me the level and said, "You've built something real here, Jenny. Your mom'd be proud." That's when I cried. Right there in the sawdust and sunshine. Not loud or messy. Just tears that felt like they'd waited years to fall. He didn't say another word. Just put a hand on my shoulder, gentle like he'd never done before. I always thought once things started going right, they'd stay that way. But life isn't a clean arc. It's more like a river, turns when you least expect it, carves through stone, makes new paths whether you're ready or not. It was early spring when I got the email. The subject line read, "National Initiative for Creative Rural Revival, Leadership Opportunity." They wanted me, Jenny Lynn Carter, to head up a pilot program bringing community studios like the Clay Hearth to struggling towns across the country. Funded by a coalition of arts councils, nonprofits, even some tech giant with a name that sounded like a fruit. I'd be based in Chicago, traveling, leading a team, overseeing the model I'd created being replicated in towns just like ours. My first reaction? Disbelief. Second? That ache again, like joy and fear were dancing a slow, awkward waltz in my chest. I didn't tell anyone at first. I needed to sit with it. Breathe it in. I walked Main Street like it was my first time seeing it. The little lending library outside the old cafe. The benches Daddy had helped build. The alley murals that changed every season now, done by local kids and visiting artists alike. The community garden was starting to sprout again, little green promises pushing through the soil. We did this. I did this. How could I leave it now? And yet, how could I not? I told Daddy first. We were fixing a fence around the east side of the garden when I finally said, I got offered a new job. He didn't look up. You already got 3 jobs. This one's different. Big. National. That got his attention. Out of town, he asked. Chicago. I'd be helping other towns build what we've built here. He set the hammer down. Well, he said after a long pause, they picked the right woman. That surprised me so much I forgot to speak. But, he added, you gotta ask yourself something. What's that? Do you want to build, or do you want to go around talking about building? That stung a little, but not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. And because I didn't know the answer yet. The town buzzed when the news finally came out. Maddie looked crushed when she heard. She followed me around the studio like a duckling that had lost its pond. You're not leaving, right? She asked. Just like visiting Chicago leaving? I couldn't lie. I don't know, honey. Not for sure yet. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the mural bench outside the studio and cried. Not dramatic sobs, just slow, quiet weeping. The kind that sneaks up when you love something so much you don't know how to hold it and let it grow at the same time. Camille called me that night. I heard the news, she said. Are you going to accept? I want to, I whispered. But I also don't. She was quiet for a long moment. Jenny, you're not choosing between love and legacy. You're choosing how to carry both. A week later, the whole town threw a surprise bon voyage / maybe you're not going party. Only in a place like this would people plan a farewell they hoped wouldn't be needed. There were pies and potato salad, and even a weirdly emotional slide show projected onto the side of the gym wall. And then Daddy got up to speak. He hadn't spoken in front of people since my mama's funeral. Most of y'all know me, he began, and you know I ain't one for speeches. But I gotta say something about my daughter. He glanced at me, cleared his throat. Jenny was always different. And I didn't always make that easy on her. I figured the world would chew her up, so I tried to toughen her up first. He looked down at his boots, then back up. But turns out, she was stronger than I ever was. Built something better than anything I ever put together with a nail gun. There was a silence in the crowd, like the air itself was holding its breath. She taught me, he said, that some things you build don't go on a blueprint. They go in people. And if she leaves, she ain't leaving us. She's just spreading what we already got right here. He raised his cup of lemonade. To Jenny. And to whatever town she makes home next. The whole crowd echoed it. I sat in a plastic folding chair, covered in tears and potato chip crumbs. I took the job. But I didn't leave. Not fully. I set up a small team to run the clay hearth while I traveled 3 weeks at a time. Camille helped us create a partnership with artists in other towns. Some of our mural kids even got to do exchange visits. And every time I came home, it was like being wrapped in a quilt stitched with every color I'd ever painted with. Daddy kept volunteering at the studio. He taught a woodshop class for teenage boys who didn't know where they were headed yet. I watched him one day, showing a kid how to sand the edge of a shelf, and realized he wasn't just building furniture. He was building trust, hope, maybe even a new version of himself. There's a tree behind the gym, half dead, half blooming. It was always like that, even as a kid. One side bare and splintered, the other covered in green so thick it looked like a patch of sky had fallen into it. Maddie once asked me why it looked that way. Maybe it can't decide, I said. She thought about it for a second. Or maybe it just decided to be both. That tree haunted me. Because I was starting to feel like it. Half here, half somewhere else. Half joy, half guilt. The national work took off fast. I was flying to towns in Oklahoma, Georgia, even up in Maine. They all looked like pieces of the place I'd grown up in, beautiful in their resilience, starved for something more than just getting by. I'd walk down their cracked sidewalks and see kids who reminded me of Maddie. See buildings that begged to be filled with laughter and color. But every time I stood in front of a crowd explaining the clay hearth model, my heart ached. Because my clay hearth wasn't there. It was home. Back in that dusty town with the stubborn fields and that wonky gym with a roof we'd patched 12 times. Where people still called me that Carter girl, but now said it with pride. I came home that June to a surprise I never expected. They'd turned the old grain depot into a maker's space. Welding, sewing, robotics, even a little podcast booth. The kids had done it. With Camille's help, a few local donations, and pure fire-in-the-belly energy, they'd drawn up the plans and followed through. And the best part? Maddie was the project lead. She was 14 now, taller, more sure of herself. When I saw her holding a clipboard and bossing 2 high school boys around about where to mount the solar panel, I nearly cried on the spot. You did this? I asked. She shrugged. You showed me how. That night, I sat on the gym steps with Daddy. We still did that sometimes, watched the town breathe from a quiet distance. I think I want to come back, I said. He didn't look surprised. Tired of all those big shots and fancy hotels? I smiled. No, not tired. Just ready. He sipped his coffee, then handed me the thermos. You know, you don't have to pick one or the other. I raised an eyebrow. You just gotta stop thinking of it like leaving and staying. Maybe you're like that tree out back, got one side that soaks up the sky and one that stays rooted. I chuckled. Since when you talk in metaphors? He smirked. Since I started hanging around artists and teenagers all day. A few weeks later, I stepped down from my national role. Not all the way, I stayed on as an advisor, offered online workshops, helped with curriculum design. But the travel stopped. My bags stopped living half-packed by the front door. And I stayed. Fully. We expanded the Clay Hearth into the Clay Collective, a network of spaces, including the new Maker Depot, the studio, and an old barn we converted into a summer retreat for rural teens. The whole town pitched in. People who'd never met shared tools, meals, stories. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And me? I finally planted my roots without apologizing for the wings I used to have. One summer night, after a community dinner in the garden, Daddy pulled me aside. Want to show you something, he said. He led me behind the studio, to the side yard we used for storage. There, standing on a hand-built stone platform, was a wooden sculpture of a hand holding a sunflower. "You made this?" I asked, stunned. He nodded, suddenly shy. "Had a little help from the kids. Thought maybe it was time I made something for you." I touched the smooth grain of the fingers. The sunflower's petals were metal, welded with messages etched into each one, words from the kids, phrases like "believed in me," "second home," "my start." At the base was a plaque that read, "For Jenny Lynn Carter, who built what couldn't be built." I turned to Daddy. "You never really said you were proud of me." "I didn't have to," he said, voice rough. "You built it anyway. If you asked me what success looks like, I wouldn't say awards or articles, or even that photo of me standing next to a state senator at some gala I barely remember. Success is the sound of the studio door creaking open on a Tuesday morning and the smell of coffee already brewing. It's Maddie showing up early to set up the paints, humming some song I don't know. It's Mr. Harris in the corner with his birdhouses, his hands finally steady again. Success is watching the lights stay on even when I'm not the one flipping the switch. By the time fall rolled around, the town felt like a quilt we'd all stitched together, one patch at a time. The Clay Collective wasn't just my dream anymore. It had grown bigger than me, which is what dreams are supposed to do if you let them breathe. I started training a few of the older kids as junior leaders. Maddie, of course, was the natural choice. She had this way of speaking that made people listen. Fierce but kind, like a sunflower pushing through concrete. She still came to me for advice sometimes, but more and more, I caught her giving it out to others. She ran workshops, wrote a grant proposal, and got it, even started designing her own mural for the side of the depot. "You're making me obsolete," I joked one day. "Good," she said. "Then you can finally sleep in." But stepping back wasn't easy. There were mornings I'd wake up in a cold sweat, worried I'd forgotten to file a form or check on the kiln or water the herbs in the community garden. Letting go of something you've built with your bare hands feels like handing over a piece of your soul. I told Daddy once, when we were cleaning up after a community dinner, "What if I'm not ready to let go?" He dried his hands on a dish towel and said, "Then don't. But make sure you're not holding it so tight it can't grow." He always knew how to say what needed saying. Eventually. That winter, we hosted our first youth showcase and open mic in the gym. I didn't headline it. Didn't even introduce the event. I sat in the back row, wrapped in an old flannel, watching the kids do everything I used to do, plan, organize, support each other when someone got nervous. The lights were dim, the crowd was full, and the air buzzed with something bigger than pride. It was legacy. When Maddie got up to speak, she looked out over the crowd and said, "This place taught me that being seen changes you. So we're going to keep making spaces where people feel seen. Especially the quiet ones. The weird ones. The ones who don't think they belong." I nearly wept into my coffee. The next week, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, a real letter folded carefully and tucked into an envelope with a sunflower sticker sealing it. It was from a girl named Lacey in a town up north. One of the programs I'd helped design had reached her school. She wrote, "I thought I was weird for liking clay and wanting to make stories with my hands. But my teacher told me about you. She showed us your story. And now I think maybe I'm not weird. Maybe I'm just early. Someday I want to visit your studio. Or maybe build my own. I hope I get to hug you." That letter sat on my desk for a week before I could read it without crying. It reminded me that this thing I started, this stubborn, soft, art and sawdust thing, had a heartbeat that echoed far beyond our town limits. I started a mentorship program soon after. Kids from all over the state, some from other states, came to spend weekends in town, shadowing our team, learning how to build something from the ground up. Not just murals and garden beds, but trust, community, safety, purpose. We housed them in guest rooms offered by local families, cooked big dinners together, had bonfires where people told stories that made you ache in your chest. I watched two boys from opposite sides of a county line start a spoken word duo. A girl who'd never used a paintbrush painted a whole wall of a shed in sunflowers and named each one after someone who'd made her feel seen. And Maddie, my Maddie, was right at the center, leading it all like she was born for it. One afternoon, I came into the studio and found her standing in front of the original mural, the one with the hands and the garden of strange, impossible flowers. "I think I want to add to it," she said. "Add?" I teased. "That's sacred ground." She grinned. "Exactly. So I want to plant something new. Next to it. What would you plant?" She paused, thoughtful. "A tree. One side blooming, one side bare." I laughed. "Of course you would." The last mural we painted that year wasn't the biggest, or the brightest. It wasn't even technically the prettiest. The lines were messy in places, the colors bled where we got distracted laughing. But it was the most honest thing we'd ever made. It wrapped around the side of the gym like a storybook, each panel a memory of what the town had been and what it had become. The final section showed hands, old and young, planting something together in the same dirt. And right there, standing tall and impossible, was Maddie's tree. Half bare, half in full bloom. And above it, in swirling brushstrokes of deep red and orange, the words, "We built this from both." By spring, we were hosting quarterly town meetings in the depot, planning with folks we used to only wave at from porches. I'd sit there with my coffee, watching Miss Geraldine argue about compost strategy with Mr. Parker like it was life or death, and I couldn't help but smile. These were the kinds of arguments that meant a town was alive. We didn't fix everything. There were still potholes in the road, and the old mill still sat like a ghost at the edge of town. But the people were different. We saw each other now. Really saw. One warm Saturday morning, I came into the studio early and found a plain wooden box on my desk. No note. Just my name carved into the lid. Inside was a hand-carved clay stamp, shaped like a sunflower, and a leather-bound notebook. The first page read, in my father's neat block letters, "Every home's got walls. Some people build them to keep things out. You built yours to let things in. Thank you for not listening to me when I told you not to try. Love, Dad." I sat at my desk and cried for a long time. Not because I was sad. Because there was something sacred in being seen like that, especially by someone who once couldn't understand you. That summer, we held our first Founders Day festival. Music in the street. Food trucks in the gym lot. Art stalls, dance recitals, a poetry slam judged by my high school English teacher who once gave me a C for thinking too much. Maddie gave a speech that left everyone crying into their lemonade. She said, "We used to think art was something you did on paper. But it's not. It's how you live, how you care, how you stay." She looked at me when she said that. And I knew, then, she was ready. I made the decision quietly. No big announcement. No farewell. Just one sunny morning, I handed Maddie the keys to the studio. "You built this," she said. "And now it's yours to grow." She didn't cry. Neither did I. But when we hugged, we didn't let go for a long time. Now I teach part-time at the local college, community revitalization through art and equity. A mouthful, I know. I garden. I write. I help when I'm needed. And most days, I walk the long way home past the murals and benches and windows we fixed with our own hands. Daddy still comes by on Fridays to help the new woodshop teacher. He calls the students knuckleheads, and they call him sir. I think he likes it. Maddie's already applying to fellowship programs, wants to help start a center like ours down south. I told her, go. Told her I'd keep the tree blooming while she's gone. And every so often, I get letters. Little clay-smeared envelopes from kids in places I've never seen, telling me how they made something because they heard about a girl from a working-class town who did the impossible. People ask me sometimes, "Do you regret not going bigger?" And I always say, this is big. Because there's nothing small about changing a life. Nothing small about staying. Nothing small about choosing to plant yourself where the soil looks too rough and saying, "Watch me grow anyway." So, if you ever pass through our town, look for the sunflower sculpture behind the gym. Sit a while under the tree with the half-blooming branches. You'll hear the sound of laughter inside. Maybe music. Maybe just the quiet hum of clay wheels turning. And if you feel something in your chest, something warm and old and fierce like hope, you'll know you found it. The color of clay. The shape of home.